Welcome. What we have going on right now. It's me, Tony D, and I'm with Rainier Avenue Radio, and in partnership with we are bringing you Earth Deserves More Than a Day. It's been just a powerful week-long celebration of environmental justice, community storytelling, cultural expression held right here at the historic Columbia City Theater and online. We've had great partners, like I said, King County Parks, Metro, City of Tukwila, sponsored us and partnered with us for our trip to the Duwamish River. I'm going to talk about that a little bit. And we brought together frontline leaders, community members, artists even. We have the Art of Soul Gallery to elevate the message that our Earth deserves more than a single day of recognition. Earth deserves more than a day. This is our panel discussion with the elected officials. And we're just going to talk about environmental justice and what that looks like and what that means. And, you know, from my perspective, I remember we did a number of debates during this last electoral season, and for a number of city council positions, the attorney general position, and even the gubernatorial debate, and got to ask some questions. And maybe it was me not asking the question or any of the other moderators asking the question, but I remember we heard answers about things as varied as what's going to happen with unsheltered folks in that situation, and what's going to happen with crime. And these are issues that were important to people, but I didn't hear a lot of commentary on climate justice or environmental justice. And that's why we're bringing this to the forefront today. So I first want to bring on Mayor Greg Wheeler from Bremerton. Mayor Wheeler, how are you, sir?
Doing well, Tony.
Well, thank you for joining us. Mayor Wheeler, this is not a political thing that I'm about to say, but every time I have requested you have been responsive. And from what I know, you've been responsive to your community. And I'm going all the way back to COVID. When COVID first hit, ladies and gentlemen, one of the first things that I did was I contacted mayors from pretty much every city in the state of Washington to ask them what they were doing for Black people, because we couldn't gather. We didn't go to our social places. We couldn't meet at the church. And we were all suffering from something that wasn't in the eye of mainstream media at that time. And I got, some people called me back, some people didn't, but Mayor Wheeler did. So I appreciate that. I don't know that I really got a chance to thank you for that.
You're welcome, Tony.
And joining us here on stage, it's not often that you live a life where you get to have, a couple of nice guys that that are mayors. And our distinguished mayor of Seattle, Mayor Bruce Harrell, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Tony.
And, just the kind of the same thing. This is not a political statement. I just appreciate you always being there. And if I call on you, you show up. And I don't know how that works with everybody else, but I appreciate it. And from what I've seen, it works with our community as well. Again, this important discussion that we're having about environmental justice and climate justice. And I'll ask this first question for both of you. Mayor Wheeler, I'm going to ask you first to respond to this question, which is a little question, but it's a big question. For you, as mayor of Bremerton and personally, what is environmental justice?
All right. Well, thank you, Tony. And, Earth Week, obviously, and for us, Arbor Day, we celebrated that this morning. But the environmental justice, to me, is not only the effort that we all join in together to care for our environment, but it's making sure that we create this accessibility that doesn't eliminate anybody from enjoying it or experiencing it or just benefiting from it. And so that means when we improve our waterways, our forested areas, our streams, our streamland, our parks, that we have to ensure that they're located where people can get to them. And we have to make sure they're accessible. And it's focused effort, waterfront especially. Waterfront's premium. It can be shut down pretty quick with private development, but it's maintaining that focus of making sure that we keep waterfront type areas available and accessible to all our citizens. That's just a snapshot of my viewpoints on environmental justice. I know there's more, but Tony, I'll stand by for the next questions.
All right, and Mayor Harrell, same question for you. Obviously, as mayor of the city of Seattle, we have different challenges than other areas of the state. And for you personally, what is environmental justice?
Before I answer it directly, let me say thank you for having me on the show. And Mayor Wheeler, it's really my honor to work with you. I don't know if a lot of people know that during the great migration of African Americans coming up to the Northwest from down south, escaping the Jim Crow laws, Bremerton was actually one of the first stops. Quincy Jones and my father coming from New Orleans, Louisiana, and many relatives, they stopped at Bremerton first because that's where the jobs were, the shipyards. And they were hiring, and then they migrated from Bremerton to Seattle. So there's some history there. And in this particular forum, I shared with some of my staff that as a kid, 16 years old, 15 years old, I used to sit in here and watch every movie I could possibly watch. And so it's nice coming back to my roots here in this city. So thank you for having me here. So let me answer the question technically and then break it down in terms that maybe people will better understand. So climate justice for me would to treat equals equally and unequals unequally in proportion to their inequality. Now, what do I mean by that? If two people live in the exact same area and they are equal in that respect, they will be treated equally. But if another person lives into another area that we know has higher pollution, poor air quality, poor water quality, we will treat them equitably in proportion to that disparity. And that's what under my administration, that is the lens by which we address all of our environmental policies, not equally, but equitably. Seattle is a very dense city. It's like the 8th most dense city in the country of major cities. In 84 square miles, we have about 750,000 plus people. And so we're very dense. And so what we have to do on a very granular level is we have to look at what areas in our own city, whether it's Duwamish Valley or the south end of Seattle, 98118, 98144, 98178. We have to look at these areas and just decide where should we invest. And then clearly we invest in those areas affected the worst. That is climate justice.
All right, we're going to get right into this. Obviously, this question is for both of you. We just had a discussion about safer fishing. And I asked the question, one of the panelists was a community fisherman. And I asked him the question, what policies would help in helping those who fish for food security? What policies would be effective? And he said, well, I'm not a politician. And then he answered, and I said, that's a policy.
Yeah.
And so, again, I will ask the both of you, what are your top priorities when it comes to addressing the climate crisis, environmental justice crisis in most impacted communities? In this instance, like in the Duwamish Valley, and Mayor Wheeler, I'll let you share where the most impacted communities are in Bremerton. That again, what are your top priorities? So, Mayor Harrell, I'll start with you.
So, and I enjoyed your discussion prior to this. I'm known as the crappie king in certain circles, self-proclaimed title, by the way. So that's crappies, a fish that many of us fish for. Chris Bennett Sr. and I used to fish with him when I was a child. So I have to tell you that with respect to fishing and water quality, the number one thing we have to do, and it's a priority of ours, is to get the data out there. But not only get the data out there, make sure we are reaching the communities that matter the most. This could require translation. This could require social media from the Rainier Avenue Radio, the means by which people get news. We have to get the data out to them, which water is safe, and even with respect to air quality. So one of our highest priorities is to make sure that we are communicating to the people who matter the most, which really pivots into my answer about what climate justice is. The other thing is we already know some data. We know, for example, in the Duwamish area, that is a troubled area with respect to some of the high tides we experienced, some of the air quality. So you will see when they had some of the floods, you'll see through Seattle Public Utilities, excuse me, and our other departments that we are very quick to deploy resources very aggressively when we see those areas impacted the most. The other piece I'll close with is our resiliency hubs. We will experience, as we've already experienced, poor air quality, incredible heat, incredible coldness as well. These are direct impacts of climate change. And so we're using, whether it's community centers or libraries, we're looking at our tool of assets to make sure we are reaching the communities, again, that need it most. People, air conditioners and heat pumps and the other things we're trying to, that are here that people use, we are trying to, again, use our assets to reach the matter worse. These are real impacts that are affecting people's lives, whether it's asthma or heat strokes and other types of issues. And so we're prioritizing the health of our city.
Mayor Wheeler, same question. And I say climate crisis as well as environmental crisis because I think you remember a couple years ago, Seattle had like the worst weather anywhere in the world because of wildfires that are taking place. And so the question is, what are your top priorities when it comes to addressing the climate crisis and environmental crisis in Bremerton's most impacted communities? And I say impacted communities, and I don't know what that is in Bremerton, but I know this: if you're Black, you breathe 2 times worse air than if you're white. If you're Hispanic, you breathe 3 times worse air than you were white. And these things vary across the state, and Bremerton's right across the water. So I don't know. For you, again, what are when it comes to addressing the climate, what are your top priorities?
Absolutely. Thank you, Tony. The Bremerton is a relatively lower income city, and so we feel the effects of climate change at a different level than maybe more affluent or even middle income cities. And so, simple things like tree canopies, like accessible parks are important for respite for our community. We, and when we talk about even our shellfish beds or our salmon, and we talk about our, in Kitsap County, Bremerton, we share this land, and we are on Suquamish ancestral lands that we work together to ensure that we have partnerships in place. And it could be just ensuring we have the adequate salmon recovery programs in place. It's a big deal in Bremerton, and a lot of folks don't know about it, but we are continually working on our culverts, removing fish passage barriers to allow the spawning to continue, to allow the natural cycles to happen where we are replenishing salmon. We control stormwater runoff. We have policies for that. We are, we put a lot of effort into the detail of ensuring stormwater is controlled properly so we aren't polluting our Puget Sound. And I'll keep going back to the efforts to protect our environment, to ensure that it's there for all of us to enjoy, not just today, but for generations to come. And we are, we have lower income folks in Bremerton, but so I look at the city life that we have in our own town versus our neighbors and our partners in the community, where it's vitally important that we have respite away from the inner grids that we live in, the concrete areas where I live also, so we can go out and enjoy nature, get the clean air, make sure we have access to the clean water, the boating opportunities, or just recreational opportunities next to a lake. Those are all parks policies, stormwater control policies, their environmental policies that are aware and acknowledge the importance of salmon recovery, shellfish bed recovery. A lot of it ties together. We could go on and on about the tree value and ensuring that we maintain what we have in the city, which is over half of our city is actually forested. And a lot of individuals don't know that, with its own set of streams and lakes that aren't necessarily on a map, a park map. Those trees provide oxygen. They provide, nutrients. They're habitat for wildlife. There's, there's shade when needed. So there's a lot of value in that. Policies protect this canopy in this forested area. And so, I feel fortunate to be in a city where we haven't grown to the point where we can't manage the future in a way that balances growth, industry, and the environment. And so it's just a fortunate time. I'm honored to be actually here, making sure we stay on the right path.
Well, you mentioned the future and the youth. That's the future. We had an amazing youth night here, but both Mayor Harrell and Mayor Wheeler last night, just heavily attended, a couple of different panel discussions, and they know, and they have opinions about environmental justice and climate justice. And Mayor Wheeler, I'm coming back to you with this question first. How are you engaging youth in climate action and in environmental justice and green job opportunities in Bremerton?
Yeah. Well, today was an example of what we celebrate. We are Tree City. We are a designated Tree City. And there's a couple things, criteria you have to meet to become that. And part of it is having a tree planting ceremony where where youth get involved. And then we read proclamations. We have comments that talk about the value of just trees in general, but how they fit into the overall climate and the ecosystem that we have. Nonstop education for me with our school districts. I personally started a couple of mayor's awards. One was for this Washington State Science and Engineering Fair, and one was for the Association of Washington Cities Leadership Award that they give out. I'm in a clearinghouse locally, but I've asked our students to focus on the challenges that cities face across the nation, and especially in the city of Bremerton, with specific focus in the city of Bremerton. And environment is inevitably what students pick. It is almost every time they pick the environment to focus on. And that's because those are the ones where science can enter into the equation of providing solutions. And so I've had these range from, drones, targeting toxic weeds to lake cleanup efforts and strategies. And it's just what I'm doing with this is prepping the future generation to think along these lines of how they can be a good steward for the environment.
Thank you, Mayor Wheeler. Mayor Harrell, same question. How are you, your administration, engaging youth? And I'm going to add this, especially those from underrepresented communities in climate action and green job opportunities. And again, we had an amazing youth night last night we don't have to ask for diversity because it's in our community. But I'm going to say there were so many different cultures and ethnicities that were here for this conversation yesterday. So in South Seattle, we are who we are. And so that's why I'm adding that to this question. How are you engaging youth, but especially those from underrepresented communities, in climate action and green job opportunity?
So the first thing is we have to go meet them where they are in their life. And so yesterday they actually met me where I was. We had about 30 or 40 youth in our city hall and in my conference room, and talked to them about what issues matter to them. And then the day before, I was actually at a middle school talking to the middle schoolers after school about what is of importance to them. And I think in the last month, I visited several high schools to understand, is it climate? And you have to understand something about this climate movement, this war against climate change. Sometimes it's hard to think about when you're living in trauma because of bullet fire, gunfire. Sometimes it's hard to think about when you're living with trauma because you lost a friend because of a lack of safety issues. It's hard to think about the planet and the water and the air when your own life is at stake. So what we try to do is to meet these young folks where they are and find out what's important to them, and then share with them the fact that the polar ice caps are melting as well, and that they have a part of a larger ecosystem. They're part of something bigger than themselves. This could be family, community, church, organizations, nonprofit organizations, and indeed the world order here in terms of our natural ecosystem. So what we do is we convene them. We have good conversations, non-judgmental conversations. When we put together our transportation levy, we looked at transit. This city was gracious enough to pass a $1.55 billion transportation levy. And we said, with respect to transit, we led with safety in transit, which is a means toward environmental sustainability to stop our reliance on fossil fuels. What matters most to you in terms of the rider experience, whether it's getting off the bus, getting on the bus, being in the bus. So we put about $9 million into that budget based on what they said. So we'll continue to listen to the voice of the youth. I updated our climate action plan. I issued an executive order very recently. It's the first time this has been done by the city since 2013. And you'll see strong components in there strengthening our collaboration with the youth, whether it's our youth commission, dealing with the high schools, going to the high schools and talking to them. So we do realize that. I'll end with a quote that Governor Inslee shared that I thought was a very appropriate quote. He said, "We're the first generation to feel the sting of climate change, and we are the last generation that can do something about it." So that's our youth right there. They're going to fight this way after we're gone. You're seasoned like me, Tony. We're still young in spirit. That's the only thing we're young in, by the way. So they are going to be the future for us. And so we'll be very collaborative and very intentional about having their voice.
And Mayor Wheeler, Mayor Harrell, you know how I get down. We are Rainier Avenue Radio. I represent South Seattle. What investments are being made in South Seattle neighborhoods to combat environmental health disparities like air and water pollution?
Again, I mentioned the specific zip codes because I lived in South Seattle for most of my life. Grew up in the Central District, and then as a high school, I moved near Franklin, and I've been in this zip code for 40, 50 years. Like I said, I'm seasoned like you, Tony B. So what we're doing again is we know, for example, in my executive order, we're looking at low.
I earned all this grade that you said.
I want to come up with a term, low pollution neighborhoods, LPNs. So LPNs are something that I issue through an executive order. We will target areas, and we're going to do this on a pilot, 3 neighborhoods that we know have the worst air, the worst water, some of the worst that are not equipped well enough to deal with this climate change. And that is very well likely to be in the south end of Seattle, as an example. And we are going to, through a pilot, make sure everything we do, whether it's heat pumps, whether it's resiliency hubs, whether it's our transit strategies, whether we're building through our comp plan housing that makes a lot of sense around light rail, we're going to do everything possible to make sure it becomes the best. I started with what climate justice is. So if we know that this area, for example, has been underinvested in for decades and decades, way before I was mayor, our low pollution neighborhood strategy and the executive order that I issued will target these areas with these kinds of investments. You have to put your money where your mouth is. And if our mouth is into justice, that's where our money will follow.
And Mayor Wheeler, I haven't forgotten about you. I'm just repping South Seattle. I'll get back to you. Mayor Harrell, what's your message to young people and residents in South Seattle who feel climate justice is a fight they've inherited without enough support? And you did discuss some of the drama that people have just living day to day. But what is your message to those young people, those residents in South Seattle who don't think about climate justice, environmental justice on a daily basis, and then bam, I'm telling you, you're breathing 2 times worth air, in some instances 3 times worth air than white folks.
Here's my message to young folks. And sometimes this stings a little bit. Now, I've raised 3 young folks that now know everything under the sun, by the way, and they've all, fortunately, have gone to college and done some good things in their life. And I still have writings that I wrote about justice when I was 16 years old. I was a political science major. I talked about this in high school. People know that I was a Garfield. I was that one that talked about social justice. And what I tell young folks is, number one, you don't know everything. You have to learn. You have to listen. And if you listen and learn, you realize that some of the most important movements in this country have actually been advanced by young folks. There's a time to be angry, and there's a time to march, and there's a time to protest. There's a time to learn and listen. And so just because you could be frustrated by what you see, particularly in the world of Donald Trump in 2025, you could be frustrated at billionaires having access to information that they should not have access to. The world of cybersecurity has now become alarmingly bad. We understand your anger. But believe also that we are resilient, and you do have leaders in place. And I'm one of those leaders in place that will always follow the voice of the youth. But sustainability means fighting with the right values, fighting because you believe ultimately in the goodness of people, that truth will always prevail over falsity. Climate change is based on science. It's based on data. The fact of the matter is our world is warming. And so I tell young folks to not be so caught up in hate and anger, but to be inspired by love. Love for your community, love for the planet, love for the world, love for the air. And don't get caught up in the toxicity that you see going on. It's very seductive to get caught up in that toxicity. That is my lesson to young folks. And sometimes, it, like I said, it stings a little bit because they are living in a different world that I lived in when I was their age.
Okay, I'm going to take a couple questions. So if you'd like to ask a question, line up that white pole, or that pole right there with the white strip on it, and I'll take a couple questions. But first, I want to ask another question of Mayor Wheeler. Over in Bremerton, we know that climate change doesn't stop at a neighborhood or at county lines. So what's happening in Seattle, what's happening in Tacoma, et cetera. What systems do you have in place to ensure long-term coordination in working with your neighboring cities, your neighboring communities, that that aren't just short-term campaigns?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. You know, I do serve on regional boards with our friends from Snohomish, King, and Pierce County. And what we do, we coordinate our planning efforts. And so this around land use, and then transportation, how we manage growth is also discussed, and decisions are made at this 4-county regional board. And a lot of it, in fact, almost all of it is related to environmental justice. We know growth is coming here. It's the same growth, and the same reason people are coming today are the same reasons people like myself came in, and my family, when I was an infant in 1959, looking for opportunity. In my case, my family's case, the jobs in the shipyard. And that's what's happening today. There's still opportunity. There's jobs. We have a beautiful environment. There's cultural and educational and opportunities here. And so we know growth is coming, and we have calculated how much. It's about 1.3 million in the Puget Sound region. So what we do then is design our communities to be the most efficient they can be as far as minimizing traffic impacts. We know one of the biggest polluters is congestion from traffic, and a lot of carbon emissions going into the air. Two things happen with that. We lose air quality, and eventually those particulates come to the ground, and then they get washed into the Puget Sound. So what we try to do, again, I said that once before, but what we are planning to do is to ensure that we strategically place density where jobs education, medical care can be concentrated. And so what that does is a couple things. It creates community, but also it starts to mitigate traffic impacts by giving opportunities for all of that locally. And when we do need to interconnect, we make sure that it's done in the most efficient manner. So that's just one strategy of planning, but the ultimate result, what we're looking for, of minimizing car congestion on our freeways. We do a lot with trying to be equitable and ensure that the challenges or some of the impacts are shared equally across our region, recognizing that we all have a role and a responsibility at the same time to help manage growth in a sustainable way that values our environment. We do that locally at Kitsap Regional Coordinating Council. We coordinate our message through planning together, and then we present our case to the county, county government body, for approval. And every jurisdiction in the 4-county region does that. They go through these process. We are no different. So that's a little bit, Tony. I hope I answered your question. Okay, got a little bit into government work here, but
it's hard to take the politics out of this. Okay, I'm going to go to a couple questions from our audience. We don't have a lot of time left, and so ask a question. I've done this a whole bunch of times. Don't make a statement. We're here to listen from the mayor, but if you have a question, ask the question so that the mayors can answer it. And don't play with me, because I'll come down there and take the microphone. We're here to listen to the mayors, but ask a question. So if you have a question, I'm going to give this microphone to you.
They have a Garfield shirt on. They can ask any question they want, and they can make a statement because they got a Garfield shirt on.
Ask a question.
Make a statement, Garfield.
My just question is, what specifically is being done to ensure that environmental policy and restoration work brings community in and doesn't push people out in terms of folks who are unhoused?
Is that for both, Ken?
For both mayors, but I specifically as someone who works in South King County for mayor in Seattle.
Did you hear that question, Mayor Wheeler?
I did.
Paraphrase it in my response. The question, as I understood, thank you for the question, is particularly with the unhoused community, those who are homeless, how do we make sure that their needs are met in this fight against climate change, sort of to speak? This is a great question because it's a complicated question too, so I'm gonna give it a shot. Having grown up here, my heart goes out to anyone that has to live in a tent in this incredible heat and it's incredibly cold. I literally cringe. We've been very aggressive. There's an article that came about our homelessness investments. We've actually increased our investment when we passed almost $1 billion levy and $970 million. When you look at my administration from 2022 to this day, we've put in over $1 billion of housing, realizing that our unhoused neighbors are as important as anyone in the city. And people will say, well, you still subscribe to sweeps. We do not. I was one of the proponents of a housing first strategy that we will always ask for, almost demand housing first. So the voice of the homeless, many of whom cannot testify at City Hall, they don't have the means to advocate for themselves, is quite frankly, it's centered in our strategy. The regional homelessness authority. Let me tell you, so our strategy has been to create this organization because I don't care if a person's in Seattle or Tacoma or Renton or Federal Way. Like I grew up with all these folks that can't afford to live in Seattle anymore. So our strategy has been a regional strategy. And the challenge that I have is Seattle puts in north of $120 million in this organization. The county puts in a lot less, but no one else is putting in any more resources into that. Renton, Bellevue, Mercer Island, Auburn, Kent, Federal Way, they put in $0. And what I'm really trying to do now is create truly a regional organization because I need those resources. Tiny homes, for example, is a transitional space. We don't want anyone to live in a tiny home forever, but it's better than a tent. That is my position. 85% of the tiny homes that are here in the state are in Seattle. And these other jurisdictions, they have property, they have land. So it's going to take a regional approach. We want to center the voice of the homeless, and I want to get people out of tents because climate change affects them disproportionately. So in my definition of climate change, it definitely takes into consideration those who are unhoused.
Mayor Wheeler, do you remember the question? Do you need the question repeated?
Yeah, I think it'd be great to repeat the question.
Okay.
The question was, what specifically is being done to ensure that environmental policy and restoration work brings community in and not pushing them out, specifically for our unhoused neighbors?
All right, absolutely. You know, one of the recent things I've been able to do, and it's been a goal since I took office in 2018 and found and achieved success, is I have now hired a diversity and community engagement manager. And this person is a direct report to me. And while we've had many efforts in place to ensure that we bring everyone along with our policies and ensure that impacts are minimized to the maximum extent possible, we haven't been able to communicate what we do in a way that brings enough confidence and buy-in from folks who might be most impacted by change. And so it's two-way communication. What this individual, Dr. Briggs, will provide for us, will facilitate and champion not only what we have been trying to do, but also the feedback we need to better serve our public. And that means every bit of our public, all the way from the unhoused individual to somebody who's is comfortable in their life. We obviously are only as strong as a community as those who are most vulnerable in our system. And so it's almost like a chain with a link that is weak. And so there is an extra focus on our vulnerable population. And that goes into the addiction treatment programs, the primary medical care programs, the mental health care, mobile clinic. Those are all mobile clinic programs that I was able to start with partnerships under my watch. Transitional housing, permanent supportive housing, all kinds of rehabilitation of even credit or credit history, rental history, you know, those upward paths to get somebody into self-sufficiency, and recognizing not everybody will make it all the way through and will need help, possibly, and for some likely the rest of their lives, building those systems. But at the very least, when we do, we want to make sure, though, when we're doing environmental policies, that nobody is harmed unintentionally. This manager will be a key as far as that communication strategy to make sure we get the feedback we need, and we also provide the input out to the community on what we're trying to accomplish.
Okay, just one more question for the both of you, and an opportunity for final word. That's really what it is an opportunity for final words. But the question is, in a perfect world, and Mayor Harrell, I'll start with you. What climate or environmental policy would you pass tomorrow, and why? And then any final words you want to add on that. In a perfect world, what climate or environmental policy would you pass tomorrow, and why? And then anything following up with that you'd like to say to our audience right now.
So that's an interesting question, because that's how I live my life. In other words, every law that we can pass, I have a strong executive team, what is that law? So there's nothing that we're sitting on. I'll give you an example. The transportation levy, we invest close to $70 million in climate solutions. $70 million. That's when I said your resources have to follow your values, which have to follow your words. That's what we're doing. Of that low pollution neighborhood idea that I talked about, this $8 million invested for the low pollution neighborhoods, $29 million for planting and maintaining new trees. We didn't talk a lot about new trees, but we updated the tree ordinance. There was always an interim since 2013. People didn't want to talk about trees. We know where there are areas such as in, again, disparate neighborhoods where we need more tree canopy. So there's no law that I could pass that we haven't thought about. The executive order that I recently done in the midst of federal fund drains, possibly by the Trump administration, we talked about climate. We're updating this plan, which is a very aggressive plan. The building emissions performance standards legislation that we passed, nationally respected, BEPS, BEPS. When we look at buildings, large commercial buildings, which are responsible for about 40% of carbon emissions. At a time where I'm trying to get people in buildings, we took that on and passed legislation, not only to look at how those buildings could be carbon neutral in 2050, but how we could make sure Black and brown and people of color participate and thrive in this industry in the new green economy. We pulled together labor and businesses and property owners to pull this legislation that, again, is nationally recognized. So my administration is trying to do everything possible. And I'm a good copycatter. So if another city is doing something that I like with respect to climate justice, you will see it enacted. That's what a good mayor does. And I'm in conversations with almost every mayor of every major city. These are my friends. And so I think we are on the right trajectory. We've reduced our carbon emissions since 2008 by 12%. That is not our goal, just 12%. But this is in a city that has grown by 25% at the same time. So we are confident that the executive order that I issued is heading in the right trajectory, and we're going to double down in our commitment to climate justice.
And is there anything that you'd like to say to those who are watching, listening right now? Just whatever, without me firing a question at you, that you'd like to share.
I'd say thank you just for listening. I try to pride myself on being accessible. I'm human. I may say something that didn't rub you the right way. That's okay. I've been married to the same person over going on 4 decades. She says I say things all the time that doesn't rub her the right way. I just say, what did I say and how can I self-correct? Let's work together as a community. Let's work together as a partner. I believe in my community. Again, I was a little kid in here that used to watch these movies back in the day. I believe in my community. The answers in this country can be found here in Seattle. We are a nation in crisis right now. And I cannot do any of this work without a strong, resilient community. And I do believe in my community. So thank you, Tony B. And you're certainly part of that community. Again, I remember, this brother used to open up. He used to be quite a singer back in the day. See him at Paramount Northwest opening acts singing. What was the name of your group?
Teleclear.
They were jamming. But we've been in this fight a long time together, brother. And I want to thank you for having me on your show. And I hope to always be of service to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Harrell. And Mayor Wheeler, same question. In a perfect world, what climate or environmental policy would you pass tomorrow and why? And then closing statements from you as well.
All right, thank you. No, it's been a pleasure. This is it's a topic that's doesn't get discussed enough. I'm glad we're doing it today. Any policy legislation, to me, it has to center around and begin to chip away at conservation as a priority. There's many things that we can do as a community to try to do the right thing. But stepping lightly in this world that we live in, especially when it comes to our natural environment, I believe will be our key to long-term success. If we can imagine the value of an electric vehicle and how it might, improve our air quality and ultimately our water quality. But if we're talking about 6 electric vehicles in a 5,000 square foot home, then we are now talking about demand on a grid that is finite. That grid, with the challenges we have with hydroelectric being a wonderful clean source of energy, at the same time, do not anticipate dams being expounded on, more coming. So then we're talking about shortages in energy. Or increasing in dams, which is bad for our salmon habitat and other parts of our ecosystem. No matter what choices we make it's going to have to include just awareness of the resources we have in front of us and how we use them, and how we leave a place either after the day, even if it's at a park, or how we leave a backpacking trip when we head up into the Olympic Mountains where I grew up. And I was taught as a kid, being raised here on the Kitsap Peninsula, where the Olympic Peninsula is my backyard and my playground, is you leave the place as if nobody could even see that anybody had been there before, all the way down to brushing around where you might have had a small fire, and then circling that, getting it buried and secured properly. So, it's just a philosophy of thinking transit when you can, multimodal when you can, carpooling when you can, looking after your neighbors, reducing our footprint. Any policy, I don't think we can legislate our way out of this crisis. I think it's going to have to come from a foundational look at how we do business, and starting with walking the walk. I'll just close this part by saying I've been commuting on foot for 40 years. And so this is my life, first as a shipyard worker and now down here at City Hall. I feel fortunate I can do it, but at the same time, I do it visibly as an example of a way that we can get around that is less impactful and least impactful on our environment. The message I would share, and I don't say that by trying to take a moral high ground. I feel fortunate that we are in an area here in the country, Bremerton and Kitsap County, where we can do these type of things. And I'm grateful for our bigger neighbors and our friends in Pierce, Snohomish, and King, you, Mayor Harrell, for the tremendous opportunities you provide with a city for education, for healthcare, for entertainment, for jobs. And so we take that seriously. We appreciate it very much. We enjoy the benefits of a smaller city and a more of a rural area over here. And there's a different approach of doing business. And with my example that I try to set, it's meant to try to walk the walk. I think we focus on the youth. We continue to ensure the youth get a chance to weigh in. We get a chance to explain what we do. We need to get the feedback from them. Thanks, Tony.
Thank you, Mayor Greg Wheeler. Thank you, Mayor Bruce Harrell. That's all the time that we have. Appreciate both of you taking the time out of your busy schedules to stop by here and share this information with our community. For those of you who are listening, how can grassroots organizations and community-based media like Rainier Avenue Radio be stronger partners in advancing environmental justice in the city? That's my question to you. Email us and let us know what we can do and how we can do it, and advocating for you on behalf of our community. For Rainier Avenue Radio and our partner, King County Parks, this is Tony B saying, remember, whether you believe you can or whether you believe you cannot, you're probably right. I'm out.